Morning, my friends. Welcome to another installment of Revisiting Middle Earth role-playing game system, otherwise known as MERP, produced by Iron Crown Enterprises. You know, I'm looking at one of these, probably one of the earliest ones I bought, one of the older ones from the original year, the original set series, and it just struck me that I got this one at a reduced price. It wasn't exactly brand new when I got it because Ira, the old gentleman, the old bearded wizard-like gentleman who ran Irish Dungeon, the game store that I frequented when I was a teenager, has this little price tag he put up here for $6. $6, right? $6. It just makes me wonder exactly what year this 1984. So this must have been something that he sold and then somebody returned it, or it was the in-house store copy. It wasn't wrapped because somebody opened it up and went through it. Back then, they wasn't as conscientious about keeping the cellophane wrapping material, intact on these things on the shelf. A lot of people or would-be players, they didn't think about it, or they just didn't care. It is what it is. And the reason I know this is one of the original set series because it has the little red marking flag up here, if you will, and very few of them have this. Very few of them. Anyhow, I like this particular one, Bree, and the Barrow-downs, because it is the everywhere, or the crossroads of Middle Earth, if you will. This is the greatest place to begin in a campaign for most player characters. Whether or not they're from Bree or the surrounding area or not, it still is in the movies and the books. It's the crossroads where everybody tends to run across each other at some point, and anybody who travels passes through Bree. Also, because only in the northwestern section or western section of Arnor in a certain age period and after can you encounter any large concentrations of hobbits. So if one of your characters wants to play a hobbit or your whole group's hobbits, well, this is a good classic location to have a beginning from, especially since half the population are halflings. And the book itself contains quite a few really good color maps. It's traditional ice, shows the various townships, details, goes to into the larger map section. This would be a cutout of one of the bigger full maps that you would get from the source books. This one did not come with one of those. You've got all your definitions and terms and conversion charts. And a while back I did an installment on maps and map creation, and I said that there's an older style of cartography and a newer style that's familiar with players. The older style used a lot of symbology that took them, well, as a creator, to create your own takes a lot of extra work to do, and yet it gives you the uniform legend, I guess is what you'd want to call it. But here in Bree, they actually give you a breakdown of it. It doesn't do, maybe you can get a good look at it. So you can see the hills and the trees and the terrain markers, and the little squiggly lines on the maps actually have meaning. Tell you the terrain, the elevation changes, whether or not the stuff facing you is steep or rounded, that kind of stuff. And it is the kind of thing that somebody who's really big into detail and stuff enjoys that sort of thing. So I like it. And it also gives us our basic color area map key, which means in this case, excuse me, 1 inch equals 20 miles, which allows you to put it in perspective. And I think the lion's share of their maps were built on that same scale. Don't quote me on that. Not quoting anyone. So you got your brief, chapter 2, Bree and the Barrow-downs, introduction and history, Bree-land, small Silurian, central Eriador, blah, blah, blah. Bree and the Barrow-downs, settling and refounding in Bree-land. Actually, and they go to, and this is typical of ICE in most of the MERP source books and adventure modules, as I keep saying, they go do the extra mile for the backstory, but in part that's because J.R.R. Tolkien already created it, and all these fellows had to do was to quantify it and put it into a proper location for the setting, and then maybe fluff it out of here. But for the most part, a lot of the stuff was pre-made for them, and so they had a great guideline to go by. You can't get that in other game systems. I'm not going to argue that. I mean, that is the standard nowadays. But if you go back and you look at anything pre-1980, and you'll see there's a significant difference in story material, right? If you go back and you look at the really old stuff, most of it was more about the mechanics and giving you everything you need to construct your own world and to fill it. Not to give you the story and the backstory and the history and the whys and what fors and where have yous. Where we started to see a bit more in-depth development even in Dungeons and Dragons and in other game systems coming out in the early 80s. And at the time, Iron Crown, specifically in MERP, really showed the depth to what these things could achieve if the people and the writers and the designers and the producers all got together with an agenda that wanted you to have a well-defined world. It was from that mindset that we've seen the expansions from Dungeons and Dragons specifically. I can't speak for a lot of the other game systems. I could argue it, but not necessarily be online with what we're talking about. Excuse me. But if you look at the early Greyhawk material, the backstory and storyline was thin. It got richer over time, but it never really fully was developed. It wasn't until Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance took off, and in part because the players, us, we demanded more. We wanted more out of our campaign material. We wanted more out of our source books. We sought it out, and the market is driven by that sort of the wants and desires of people kind of paying for stuff. And so not only was the mechanics becoming more broad and more in depth, so they could tap into more and more stuff, they started realizing that the richer storylines also had a place. And it's so much so that in both cases of Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance, we started seeing novels came out, and the novels fed the game material, and the game material fed the novels. Even though sometimes they ran parallel to each other and conflicted with each other a little bit, it doesn't change the fact that you have in Forgotten Realms, you have one of the richest playable campaign worlds ever created. And I'm sure plenty of people will argue, well, this system had better graphics, and this system has better, verbiage and a richer whatever, and I won't argue that. Okay, I'm sorry, I won't argue it, but at the same time, I tell you, I'm sorry, the volume, the sheer volume of the stuff weighs out what I'm saying. Forgotten Realms, I don't know how much, 100 source books and modules that are tied into that particular portion of Dungeons and Dragons, and then we've got the novels. Hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds. I know because in my storage locker I have boxes of of novels from settings and Forgotten Realms. I got very few Dragonlance material stuff because I wasn't into Dragonlance. I got into Forgotten Realms, and as a budget person, I only had X amount of dollars. Even when I was a bachelor and was spending retarded money at that time every week, I still had to limit myself to what I could buy, and I'd go to the store, to the bookstore, and I'd buy 1 to 3 novels every couple paydays. So, and I had to split it up because I was buying Forgotten Realms, I was buying Star Wars, and I was buying a lot of the faster products. I was buying both. Every MechWarrior BattleTech book came out, and chunks of Shadowrun because they really entertained me, right? So huge portion of my bookcases when it comes to pure novel storyline stuff is that material, and it allowed me as a GM and as a player when I played or I ran campaigns in those settings to have a much deeper understanding of the world we were playing in, how things ought to be run, how the other people expected what they expected. So when we talk about MERP and ICE, that's what everybody who's ever played anything based off of J.R.R. Tolkien's works has expectations, and they strove to meet them. And in the case of Iron Crown, they exceeded them and then some. This stuff, like I said, this stuff just is entertainment reading material by itself. If you've never played it before, it's just the depth of the material here really can expand your view and your horizons and your appreciation for the books and the movies that are out there. It's just my opinion on that, right? But I'm sure I'm ranting and rambling, and you may agree or you may not agree, and that's your prerogative, right? At this point, it is what you wish it to be. Chapter 2.5, Neighboring Towns of Stadelcombe and Archet goes into the little blurbs of history on their own. Most of this is just, like I said, expanded material that you find in the books and the novels of J.R.R. Tolkien. Then we get into things that he wouldn't cover because unless it's in his notations for personal reference material. And I'll tell you, as a would-be author, a would-be writer, I have gobs and gobs and gobs of this stuff because you don't know what little things are going to prop up your story. So when I created my would-be Stellar Frontiers material and wrote several novels in that venue, I had established an economy and this and that and the other thing. So when they talked about or they were doing something, it was second nature. This is why Star Wars is and Star Trek, the role-playing games are so playable in some aspects because you know what to expect. You know what a blaster is, and you don't need a lot of depth and detail in it, but it's nice to have that stuff, right? And from the perspective of the seller, it's a necessity because that's how they're going to make their money, is by having extra things. So we go into the economy. We have one of the few of these that you'll find in any of their books, but this is a breakdown of your average material cost for purchases. You find that in the player handbook in D&D. Well, you didn't have this listed in the early edition of MERP's core book. I have to go back and look at the 2.0 version I have to see if it showed up there. But this was the I need to buy a bedroll or backpack or boots or a heavy meal and trail rations, so on and so forth. Here's my running list of costs. And we've had conversations on the brigade in the short past about the economy of game systems and players and GM's largest, largesse, the Monty Hall philosophy or the very skewed economy where I've had players go, I have gold pieces. This is all these get. I can't do that. 5 gold pieces. It should be 500 gold pieces. 5,000. And I'm thinking, you know what? Yeah, yeah. So if you need to go to the store and buy yourself a cloak instead of paying 7 copper pieces, like it says here, I'm going to say it's going to cost you 70 gold pieces, and they're going to go. And if they got the money to throw that at it and not think twice about it, either I've got given them an entirely way too much loot, or they have not had the motivation to take that loot and turn it around. And usually, in most cases, the players will take the spendable loot, the majority of it, and roll it over into magical items, better equipment, armor, so on and so forth. And that's kind of why we go the Monty Hall route, is we want these guys. It's a different form of minimum max, right? I don't want to get off on topic on that because we could burn up a whole segment on that alone. You know, should write that down. Then so we got politics and power in Bree-land. Fairs and festivals, prominent families and personalities of Bree-land. These are great for NPCs. I say that over and over again. Both hobbits and humans, notable institutions and their keepers, the Bree School, the miller, the blacksmith, the carpenter, tanner. These are NPCs that you don't normally, as players, the group doesn't need. How often do they need to go to a tanner? Well, not that often, but occasionally, I'll get a player who, excuse me, they kill some exotic beast or creature and they want to make boots out of its hide, and I say, well, we can either just go, this is done and you've done it and you spent this amount of whatever for it, or we can actually go and role play it out, depending on my group. I like to kind of role play that stuff out because it adds flavor, and it's a segment or an aspect of gaming that doesn't get covered all that much. And the more you do with that sort of thing, in my opinion, the richer your backstory, your world's going to be, the richer the backstory is. And then there's always that continuity. Sorry, I cannot pronounce the word, where everything is connected. So later down the road, we might have an adventure where we say, hey, Joe the tanner was ambushed on his way home or on his way out to do some business, or so on and so forth. And the players go, hey, that guy made my boots, right? Or cured the material that the cobbler used to make my boots. I remember that because I had the cheapskates out of so and so or whatever. Yeah, figures of intrigue. Chapter 5, the Barrow-downs and their haunting. They go into some detail on the Barrow-downs. Right there, you get a bunch of examples of different types, the histories of why and hows, and some of the fact that some of them predate, the third age. They're from the first age, and that Greenland itself has been settled and resettled numerous times over the millennia, and each time the different group of people have expanded and developed or added to the neighborhood and its character, its flavor. And aside from the dead marshes, I think the Barrow-downs are probably between them and the dead marshes, those are the two most likeliest places. Well, I guess you could say the Valley of Urk and the White, certain sections of the White Mountains where you encounter the most concentrations of the undead. In the case of the Barrow-downs, where if anybody's read the books, quite familiar with what happened to the hobbits there. It doesn't show up in the movies. I think that part got cut out and left on the floor. You might be able to find clips of it on YouTube or in the special editions or something like that, but it goes into some detail. They don't use, generally, Lord of the Rings or Tolkien didn't use the undead to the degree that we see in a lot of other game systems like Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, this thing is starting to run long. I try hard to keep these things around 15 minutes. I know the average attention span of myself and others, and I will run on and on. Anyway, we get to Chapter 7, Suggested Adventures, Trouble on the Homestead, Meeting on the Road, Adventures on the Barrow-downs, Adventures in the Wild. There we go. Some more nice color maps and pictures. So, It's a great starting place. It's a great, really entry-level module, adventure module for players. And if, even if you have other game systems and you can come across one of these things, we can strike out that particular part and a little bit of editing, use it for just about any game system we use. And that's one of the genius aspects of Iron Crown Enterprises MERP specifically, and they go on about this over and over and over again in almost every module, every source book. They even give you the conversion charts. It was designed to be used by many fantasy role-playing systems, not specifically Rolemaster, and because that, it's very adaptable. Somewhat probably more adaptable. These book material is more adaptable than any other game system I've run across. That's just, of course, like I've learned. There are literally 100 game systems out there these days, and I have not come across most of them. So I'm just speaking from what my experience in this small corner of the gaming industry that I know and I'm familiar with, mostly out of date old stuff, because I guess I'm old and becoming out of date myself. So it is what it is. Thank you for listening to me. The handful of you that have signed up and put up with this because you find the interest. Surely isn't because of my silver tongue. That's for damn sure. Anyway, like it, flag it, blog it. Don't like it, same thing. Tell your friends. Pass the word. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.